We're here to talk a little bit about yourself, you as a human being, but also you as an artist, about what you have been doing. You have quite a colorful career already, and now you've ended up here in Estonia. Let's just start from the beginning. You're not from here, are you?
No, I originally come from New York. I was born in New York City, mostly raised in a suburb of New York City. Where to start? I think talking about my family is quite interesting, actually, because it gives a lot of useful context about my background. On my entire mother's side, I actually come from a family of artists. My mother is an accomplished painter and illustrator, as is her older sister. Her older sister taught art in public school for about 30 some odd years before she retired. And also multiple generations up, my grandmother was a painter and later in life actually got her bachelor's degree locally in Philadelphia, where she later taught art therapy even up to her early 90s. And then also my great-grandmother was a painter on that side as well. So coming from background. And also my uncle is an accomplished architect and professor at University of Toronto, worked at Harvard before that. So it's in the blood in some case. And also on my father's side, he used to do stained glass and photography. He studied under a student of Diane Arbus, actually, related to photography. And his father, later in life, he was an engineer, but also took up sculpture and painting later in life.
When you started your education, like higher education, it wasn't an art one, was it?
No. So I went to a liberal arts school called Skidmore College, which is in a town called Saratoga Springs in upstate New York. And the beauty of going to a liberal arts school is that you can study multiple things at the same time in as much depth as you want to. So I was studying a bunch of things. But first and foremost, when I visited the school, even before I applied and eventually got in, I saw that there was a jewelry and metalsmithing studio, and I was immediately drawn to it. And I was already doing things in my parents' garage, like melting copper into ingots and cutting pipe fittings and making crude jewelry out of coins and copper pipes and stuff like that. So there was something that just clicked in my brain where I said, I want to be in this room. And I made it happen. But at the same time, got to be practical in some sense. So I studied management and business as well. And so I did this kind of dual track.
But you didn't think about going into painting? You were already before you were into metals.
Yeah, so I've always liked to work with my hands. Even in high school, my first job, full-time job, was working at a mom and pop music store where I not only worked the sales floor, but I repaired string instruments like guitars, bass guitars, even violins. And so having that tactile experience calmed my brain in some way. It gave me a sense of meditation in some way, and I knew from there that I wanted to exercise that.
When you finished school, you didn't actually finish with the art. It was sort of like the minor.
Yeah, so it was a major in management and business with a fine arts minor concentration in jewelry and metalsmithing.
But you still ended up working behind the bench.
Yeah, because that's what made me happy the most at the time, and still does. But working for somebody else is different. Yeah, actually, it's important to note that my area of study in metalsmithing originally wasn't goldsmithing focused entirely. It was mostly silversmithing focused. And so what I mostly used to do was raising and hollow forming of vessels. And you can see in my exhibition that there's a small silver chalice. I made that when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
And I thought to include it in the exhibition because the subject matter is about memory and form. And I thought that was an interesting part of my history, and there's my own personal memories attached to that object. So I saw fit to include it.
But tell us a little bit about the working for somebody else behind the bench. How was it?
So initially, when you get hired somewhere or you're in the interview process, there are certain discussions that you have about not only what you can offer them, but what development opportunities there are for you. In this case, I worked for a very famous brand name, David Yurman, and specifically the bench job was in their research and development department, but in a what you would say a junior jeweler role. And what ended up happening was I got a lot of skills in some areas of production and also an insight into the manufacturing process of jewelry. But some of the skills that I learned there were not necessarily the skills that I wanted to learn. So there was a lot of, for example, cleaning castings and preparing waxes and pieces for casting. And I learned to clean castings very well. But one thing that I always wanted to focus on, and that was really attractive to me about working with jewelry, was the hand fabrication process. And I didn't get to do much of that there, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And so it was also a really tough working environment. Essentially because you work on design cycles that take a lot of planning and preparation. Things tend to change very quickly. It's a fast-paced environment. You end up working a lot of overtime. So I was working a lot of weekends, sometimes up to 60 hours a week. And if you can imagine, it's a very physical job, more blue-collar in nature. You're working at the bench. That takes a toll over time, especially if you don't have any time off.
How long did you work there?
I worked there almost 3 years. So from right after I graduated school in 2016 to about the end of 2018 or beginning of 2019.
Just as a side note, did you see anything, did you learn anything interesting regarding your major in business management while working in such like a high profile brand?
So that's an interesting question. In terms of the purely academic nature of what I studied, it was more of a kind of pre-MBA type program where you look at the theory behind, let's say, like executive management styles, and you learn also the basics of not only being financially literate, but understanding, conducting risk analyses and understanding, let's say, if you want to create a business, what competition is out there and how to position yourself and stuff like that. So I guess in a roundabout way, if I think about it now, yes, but it really wasn't on the forefront of my mind. So what I could see that I learned from there was how to build a brand, maintaining that brand equity, but also how to position yourself in the market and playing to your strengths and playing to your design sensibilities as a way to iterate on something that is initially popular or successful.
What next? I mean, when it came out of there, were you starting to work as a freelancer?
So what happened actually is I got very burnt out from working at the bench, and I knew I had to make a change. And as you can imagine, living in New York as an early to mid 20-something, money is very much an issue. I wasn't getting paid a lot to work there, and I quit without a plan. And as you can imagine, quitting without a plan is pretty rough because you have T-minus 2 to 3 months before you run out of money. You know, rent was half your paycheck to begin with, living with 2 random strangers in a shared apartment with no washing machine. You got to figure it out. And so I put my nose to the grinding stone trying to figure out what was next. I was sitting every day in cafes, applying to jobs, researching what I might want to do. Researching what type of career activities might play to the strengths that I have in my brain towards pattern recognition. I'm a neurodivergent person, and so my brain tends to work differently. So I was trying to think about what plays to my strengths rather than just putting on a suit and tie and doing the whole thing. I applied actually to a master's program at NYU in international relations. I ended up getting in, but I decided, hey, maybe not the best thing to do when you don't have a solid career plan. Going into debt, not the smartest thing, right? Mm-hmm. But long story short, I actually pivoted and ended up, after I talked to a few people about my direction, I ended up pursuing a career in financial crimes compliance. Mm. That involved an interim stop over in South Carolina, where I worked for one of the big 4 firms for a little bit, about 6 months. But moving down there, it was a bigger culture shock, actually, than when I was living as a student doing study abroad in Denmark. And I realized that people's values down there and kind of the lifestyle down there was so radically different that I wanted to seek opportunities and get a different cultural experience elsewhere. And I also have a German passport. I have EU citizenship, and I started to look in Europe for jobs in that line of work, and that's what led me to Estonia. I got a job with Wise in 2019, and that is actually what led me out here.
But you were doing jewelry all the time also.
Yeah, so I was doing things on a commission basis, but it was mostly, and my stuff very much still is word of mouth, pretty much word of mouth only, but this was mostly for family, friends of friends and stuff like that. So it wasn't something that was super prominent in my life at that point, especially because I felt burnt out from my experience working in the industry at large. So I needed a little bit of a break then.
Mm-hmm. But still, it was, I suppose, much better to be working on the things that you like on your own terms.
That's exactly right, and that's what I liked about doing this craft in the first place. Is it gives me a playground, or so to speak, to exercise my creative sensibilities, and it took me a while to actually reconnect with that because I actually had some ideas that I was working on while I was a bachelor student, but working in the industry at large and in that environment, I didn't have the time or the energy necessarily to devote to expanding on those ideas.
Mm-hmm. As I understand, you've been doing quite a lot of commission work with wedding rings. Mm-hmm. Have they been sort of like the classical type of jewelry, or can you talk us a little bit there?
Yeah, sure. So I think my sensibilities in terms of creating these wedding and engagement works are mostly traditional in spirit and also often in form. The way that developed, I can see being two specific things. One is harnessing my time living in Denmark and looking at all of the mid-century modern minimalist designs that are very typical of that region, where I got initial inspiration from. So that could be anything like the lighting design, for example, from Paul Henningsen and his pH lamps that are very famous. I actually just installed those in an apartment I bought recently, and I'm very happy about them. And so I've always had an appreciation for minimalist design that combines form and function. If you want to harken it back to kind of the Bauhaus school of thought in that way, that's very much how I think about things. And that's what informs my own sensibilities first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is that when you do this commission-based work, you want to listen to your customers and your clients about their wants and their needs and translate that into something that is both beautiful and functional and something that will stand the test of time. And so what I like to do then is combine my own sensibilities with what they're looking for and create something beautiful. That's really all there is to it. And of course, there's a business side to it as well. And, harkening back to the business degree or something like that, the reason I do this type of work, first and foremost, for myself is because it allows me to kind of make enough to A, make more of a living, and B, feel satisfied that the time and effort I put into these things gets a proper return for myself.
Mm-hmm. And this type of jewelry, it's long lasting.
Yeah, well, if I design it correctly, which it seems like I do, it should last a lifetime or multiple lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, if there's any problem or that happens to not be the case, then it's my responsibility to make it right.
Yeah, but from another point of view, even once you die, this is something that is left behind. Mm-hmm. And much more eternal than the human shell that you have been living in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll talk about the exhibition in a minute, but mm-hmm. There are some themes running through and some pretty recent life events that actually inform that for me.
But we can already go, because that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
That, your exhibition works actually are a little bit different from the commission works and like the traditional wedding.
Yeah, so there is a through line actually still to the wedding and engagement work or my overall design sensibilities. So I tend to focus on forms or aesthetics that are attractive to me as a baseline, and start to iterate from there. So I will try to, or at least in my own personal style, think about a simplified form and see how things fit together within these simple forms or natures. So for example, the work that you see in the gallery window, for example, I looked at natural forms like tree bark, for example, and used that as a starting point, but said, hey, how can I look at these things in nature and also as inspiration from life, walking in forests and everything, and tailor this more towards my minimalist design sensibility. And for example, that's how I came up with the patterns on those rings and the bracelets and everything like that. And then the other, I don't even have a name for it yet, but the block style rings, I could attribute them to a lot of things that I've seen in my life. Apartment buildings in New York, but also the Khrushchevkas here in Estonia. And that is actually something that I originally developed in my bachelor's, but I just as singular forms and not combined. But I never really had the time to iterate on it until recently. And so these forms are imbued with these memories that I carry along with me that kind of put them into what they are today, into their more final form, or so to speak. And these are not the final form now, but these are as final as it is to present day.
Yeah, I really like them. And actually, to me, they seem a little bit more like symbols or characters or like a minimalistic icon type of imagery.
That's interesting that you would put it that way. Because ultimately, actually, when I was coming up with the exhibition text, these objects might have meaning to me, but it's more important about what the meaning is to the people that see them. Once they leave my bench, it doesn't matter about what I think, right? It matters what personal meaning people find in these objects. And yeah, they are simple in that kind of nature where there is a little bit of iconography. If you want to look into the forms themselves, when you have those kind of two split rings put together, there are cross forms in that, and especially combined with the cast iron crown that I made, could have some religious subtext or imagery to it, which is funny because it's more it's we'll say Judeo-Christian imagery, because my family is actually Jewish in background culturally, and so it's just interesting how these things have through lines, and just in the art that you consume yourself, how it inspires your own work.
Absence. What does that? What meaning? What meaning does it carry for you within this exhibition, or what were you trying to say with this?
So I think I talked on one point a little bit about that, which was that the concept of meaning in terms of what these objects mean to me versus what they mean to other people. Once they leave my bench, it doesn't matter what I think about them. It's the whole eye of the beholder type thing.
Hence the absence of meaning.
Exactly. Hence the absence of meaning. But also, I look at absence in another way of, there's existential loneliness in a way. This is not only moving away from home and feeling very much like an alien, but also in my whole life growing up and being neurodivergent, there's a little bit of a mismatch or disconnect sometimes in being able to relate to people. Sometimes, not always. There's this just heaviness that comes with the concept of absence, and void and nothing.
Just humor me. Maybe I'm really on the not on the right tracks in here, but in the Western school of philosophy, usually the absence of meaning leads to some form of like nihilism, whereas in the Eastern type of philosophy, it leads to like the Zen, and the absence itself becomes the meaning. Are there any like thought roots in there also, or am I totally off the track?
You're not off track at all. They're not at the forefront of my mind, but they're definitely lurking around in the subconscious. I've done a lot of self-work and therapy for years, and so I'd say I'm past the rumination stage on these things, but there always is a degree of self-reflection on these things, and you can think about it as a light side and a shadow side, or two sides to a coin. Of course, as you mentioned, there's always going to be some, in Western philosophy, some sense of longing or suffering when you think about absence. But again, on the flip side, in the more Eastern school of thought, it's going to be the unburdening in that sense, or this Zen feeling, as you mentioned, when thinking about absence. Mm-hmm. Because, some people will jokingly say, you can't get disappointed if you don't have expectations in the first place, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And while these things are actually somewhat nihilistic or cheeky in their view on those things, there's somewhat of a degree of truth in there.
Is there some moment of rebellion also in there? Because usually when we're talking about contemporary art, like the main thing seems to be like, I want to imbue some type of meaning, but now you're talking about the absence of meaning.
You're spot on there. This has to do actually with my history in school, and also some insecurities that I have. So I mentioned that I come from a family of artists, very accomplished, innately talented, but also incredibly hardworking people. I've always, I don't want to say felt inferior in some way, but I felt like to some degree I've had a lot to live up to, and I felt kind of insecure in those areas, like the more 2D type works. I'm quite competent at charcoal drawing. I've found kind of a degree of competency and self-worth in that medium. But as related to the jewelry, in my school time, what people used to say at the crit table a lot is that your work lacks soul. Because I was very technically minded about how the material worked, getting to learn traditional ways of doing things, and focused very much on the doing rather than the attribution or the assigning of a concept to my work. So there's two ways to look at that. One is an insecurity and an immaturity in terms of thinking about things in that way. And then, as you very much picked up, the punk and rebellious side of me that says, I don't know, fuck this shit, it doesn't matter to me, or I'm going to prove these guys wrong kind of thing. And so that's really interesting that you picked up on that through line, because it's very much part of the message there. Mm-hmm. Is that I'm trying to say, well, it doesn't matter what I think. I don't need a concept. Figure out what it means to you.
Mm-hmm. And actually this kind of rhymes with the Zen Buddhist concept of the process being more important than the goal where you are mm-hmm. going.
Yep. And I think to do this craft, you have to be a little bit of a masochist in a way. And I think that ties, well, there are Western philosophies and Western religious sects that kind of adhere to that, but it's also just a very Eastern mindset in that way of, again, process is more important than end result, but also it's the suffering through the process that gets you to that end result where you're unburdened. Mm-hmm. One thing that's important for me to mention about this craft in general and about jewelry is that it taught me the importance of failure as a way to learn. I don't think I had any innate talent for this craft, but I liked doing it. And so I committed to fucking up until I fucked up less. And I still fuck up. And while that can drive you crazy, there's always something to gain and always something to learn from these failures.
Just to wrap it up, do you have any ideas where to go next, or are you currently just like coming down from the process, or are you just planning to continue on your way to wherever it takes you?
The best answer I have for you succinctly is all three at once, actually. I think I do need to take some time to mellow out a little bit, and I have some things in other aspects of life that I'd like to take care of, like doing some renovations on my apartment and other kind of housekeeping things like that. But from the jewelry side, or this art jewelry side, I think there's still a lot more to explore just in these works themselves and iterating on the baseline pieces that I've created. So for example, with those more block type rings, I have a microscope back there actually that I just got set up. I would like to explore some pave setting in those areas and adding them. I would like to also, in those more natural or tree bark forms, I would like to experiment more with adding volume to these things. So I'd like to iterate on those pieces specifically, but I also want to give the creative space for me to exercise new ideas. And at some point, I'd love to take all my steak anvils back from New York over to here so that one day I can start creating vessels again.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think we're done here. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.